when the carbon fiber baton shattered against Kaela's chest plate with a sound like breaking glass. Every cadet in the training yard went silent. But what happened next would change everything anyone thought they knew about humans. Kaela Vordin stood absolutely motionless in the center of the combat circle, her platinum hair catching the light of 3 suns overhead. Those distinctive pointed ears of her people perfectly still as she watched Instructor Vargas stare at the splintered remains of his weapon in disbelief. She'd endured the strikes without flinching, exactly as expected from someone of her homeworld, Krannix Prime, where the gravity crushed weakness and forged warriors from childhood. The other cadets, a mix of species from across the coalition, whispered among themselves, some in admiration, others in fear, because everyone knew the Krannix were bred for war, their bodies dense as starship hull plating, their culture centered around strength and honor. Kaela felt a surge of pride warm her chest beneath the armor. The same pride that had carried her through 16 grueling weeks at the Interstellar Defense Academy, where she'd outperformed nearly everyone in physical trials, endured longer in hostile environment simulations, and earned the grudging respect of instructors who'd initially dismissed her as just another arrogant Krannix. But then she heard it, a voice from the back of the formation, calm and almost conversational, cutting through the stunned silence like a blade through vacuum. "Instructor Vargas, sir, if the durability test is still ongoing, may I volunteer next?" Kaela's ears twitched involuntarily, picking up the subtle vibrations in that voice, the steady heartbeat behind it, and she turned slightly to see him stepping forward, Marcus Chen, the human from Section 7. Marcus was unremarkable by most standards. At least that's what everyone thought when humanity had first joined the coalition 3 years ago. His build, neither impressively muscular like the Krannix, nor elegantly tall like the Silvari. His brown eyes holding something Kaela had never quite understood. A depth that seemed out of place in someone from a species that had barely achieved faster than light travel before making first contact. She'd barely spoken to him, despite sharing several classes. Hadn't seen the point really, because humans were new, untested. Their planet, a moderate gravity world, that should have made them soft compared to her people. And yet here he was, walking forward with his hands clasped behind his back. His academy uniform, crisp despite the brutal training session, not a trace of fear in his posture. Instructor Vargas, a Karathi whose species had served as the coalition's military backbone for centuries, his scaled skin gleaming blue-green in the sunlight, turned his reptilian eyes toward Marcus with what might have been amusement or irritation. "Cadet Chen, this test was to demonstrate the Krannix physiological superiority, not to provide entertainment for species who would crumble under the same treatment," Vargas said, his voice carrying the hissing undertone of his people, and several cadets laughed nervously, but Marcus simply smiled. That infuriatingly calm expression, never wavering. "With respect, sir, I believe the purpose of the Academy is to understand the capabilities of all coalition species, not just showcase what we already know," Marcus replied, and Kaela found herself watching him more closely now, noticing the way he stood perfectly balanced, the way his breathing remained controlled, everything about him suggesting someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Vargas' crest flared, a sign of challenged authority, and he reached for another baton from the equipment rack. This one reinforced durasteel, capable of withstanding impacts that would dent starship plating. "Very well, Cadet Chen, step into the circle, and we'll see how human arrogance compares to Krannix durability," Vargas announced, and Kaela felt something unexpected twist in her chest. Concern maybe, because she'd seen what those batons could do, had felt the impacts herself, and while her physiology could handle it, a human surely couldn't, could they? Marcus moved to the center of the circle with measured steps, removing his uniform jacket and standing there in the standard issue compression shirt that all cadets wore during combat training. And Kaela noticed several things simultaneously. The way his muscles moved beneath the fabric, suggesting lean strength rather than bulk. The collection of small scars on his forearms that spoke of previous hardships. And most surprisingly, the complete absence of fear in his eyes as he nodded to Vargas. "I'm ready, sir. Same test protocol as you used on Cadet Vordin?" Marcus asked, and Vargas' smile showed too many teeth as he raised the baton. And before anyone could process what was happening, he struck an overhead blow that would have stunned most species even through armor. Except Marcus wasn't wearing armor, just the compression shirt. And the baton connected with his shoulder with a sickening thud that made Kaela wince. Marcus took the impact, his body shifting slightly with the blow, absorbing and redirecting the force, and while his jaw tightened and his breath hissed between his teeth, he didn't fall, didn't cry out, simply straightened and met Vargath's eyes again. "That's one, sir." Cadet Vordin received 5 strikes. "I assume the same standard applies?" Marcus said through gritted teeth, and the training yard exploded into shocked murmurs, because no one, absolutely no one, had expected the human to remain standing, let alone ask for more. Kaela felt her hearts, both of them, beating faster as she watched. Her earlier pride mixing with something else entirely, fascination, maybe, or the beginning of understanding that she'd drastically underestimated this species. Vargath's expression shifted from amusement to genuine interest as he struck again, this time targeting Marcus's ribs. And again the human absorbed the blow, his body moving with it. And Kaela realized with a start that he was using technique, not just endurance. Distributing the impact across muscle groups, breathing in rhythm with the strikes, turning his entire body into a shock absorption system. The third strike came faster. Vargath testing now rather than demonstrating. And this one caught Marcus across the back. A blow that would have dropped most beings, but the human dropped into a crouch, rode out the impact, and pushed back to standing. Sweat now visible on his forehead, his breathing harder but still controlled. "2 more, sir," Marcus managed, and Kaela found herself stepping forward without thinking, her voice cutting through the watching crowd. "Instructor, he's proven his point. This test wasn't designed for unarmored subjects," she said, surprising herself with the concern in her own voice. And Marcus turned slightly to look at her, those brown eyes meeting her violet ones. And for a moment something passed between them. An understanding, a connection that transcended species. "Cadet Vordin, unless you doubt my ability to withstand what you endured, please return to formation," Marcus said quietly. And there was no arrogance in his voice, just simple statement of fact. And Kaela felt her cheeks warm with something she couldn't quite name. Embarrassment at being called out, admiration for his courage, confusion at why she cared so much whether this human hurt himself, proving whatever point he was trying to make. Vargath looked between them, his crest flattening in what might have been respect. Then raised the baton for the 4th strike, and this time Kaela saw it coming. Saw the slight shift in the instructor's stance that indicated a maximum force blow. And she also saw Marcus see it, watch the human set his feet and tighten his core, preparing for impact with the kind of calm she'd only seen in veteran warriors. The baton came down like judgment, striking Marcus square in the chest. And this time even his technique couldn't completely absorb it. The impact driving him back to steps, a gasp of pain escaping despite his control. And Kaela was moving before she realized it, closing the distance between them. But Marcus held up one hand, stopping her without a word, straightening despite the obvious pain, despite the bruise already darkening on his collarbone, visible above his shirt collar. "1 more," he said to Vargath, and his voice was steady, impossibly steady. And Kaela understood in that moment that this wasn't about proving human durability. This was about something deeper, about refusing to be dismissed, about demanding to be seen as equal, and she respected that more than she could put into words. Vargath hesitated, actually hesitated. And in that pause Kaela heard him murmur something in Karathi that her translator picked up as perhaps humanity deserves its seat at the table after all, before he delivered the 5th and final strike. This one measured, controlled, a test completed rather than a punishment delivered. And Marcus took it with the same unflinching determination he'd shown from the start. And when it was over, when all 5 strikes had landed and Marcus was still standing, breathing hard, obviously in pain, but unbowed, the entire training yard erupted in a sound Kaela had never heard directed at a human before, genuine respect. Vargath stepped back and inclined his head, a gesture of equal to equal, and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Cadet Chen, you've demonstrated that human endurance is not to be underestimated. Your species may lack the natural armor of the Krannix or the regeneration of the Silvari, but you possess something perhaps more valuable, the will to endure beyond reason." And then, unexpectedly, he turned to Kaela. "Cadet Vordin, take Cadet Chen to medical. Ensure his injuries are treated, and perhaps discuss with him the difference between durability and resilience. You might both learn something." Kaela found herself supporting Marcus as they walked toward the medical facility, his arm across her shoulders, her arm around his waist, and she was acutely aware of how different their physiologies were. Her body temperature running cooler than his, her triple-strand muscle density making her movements more rigid compared to his fluid adaptability. And yet they fit together in a way that felt surprisingly natural. "That was possibly the stupidest thing I've ever seen anyone do," she said, as they entered the climate-controlled corridor, her voice coming out harsher than she intended, concern masquerading as criticism. And Marcus actually laughed, a short, pained sound, coming from someone who stood there and let Vargith break a baton on her armor like it was a test of manhood. "I'll take that as a compliment," he replied. And despite everything, Kaela felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "That's different. I was armored. My people are built for this. You're just fragile and stubborn," she shot back, but there was no heat in it now. Just a strange warmth that she didn't quite know how to process. And Marcus looked at her with those two knowing eyes. "Fragile and stubborn. That's probably the most accurate description of humanity I've ever heard," he said softly. And they walked in silence for a moment before he continued. "Your people are impressive, Kaela, truly. But you're all born with advantages. High gravity, dense muscle structure, reinforced skeletal systems. You're warriors from genetics, but humans. We had to become what we are through choice, through getting knocked down and standing back up, through enduring when endurance was all we had. And maybe that's why I needed to do that back there, to show that even without natural advantages, we belong here." Kaela felt something shift in her chest. Her perception of humanity, of Marcus specifically, reorganizing itself around this new understanding, and her ears, those sensitive, pointed organs that could detect the subtlest vibrations, picked up the sincerity in his heartbeat, the truth in his words. And she realized she'd been guilty of exactly what she'd fled her homeworld to escape, judging others by their physical capabilities rather than their character. "I underestimated you, underestimated your species, and I apologize for that," she said quietly, as they reached the medical facility's entrance. And Marcus paused, turning to face her fully, despite the pain it clearly caused. "You don't need to apologize. The whole galaxy underestimates us, we're used to it. But maybe help me change that. Get to know me, not as a representative of humanity, just as Marcus. And let me get to know you as Kaela, not as this terrifying Krannix warrior everyone's afraid of. Just as you," he said, and his hand found hers, warm and calloused and completely human. And Kaela felt her breath catch because this simple gesture, hand in hand, felt more significant than any combat trial she'd ever passed. "I'd like that," she admitted, squeezing his hand gently, careful of her strength. And for the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she might have found something more valuable than proving her combat superiority. She might have found a genuine connection, and as they entered medical together, the human and the Krannix, both warriors in their own ways, she thought about her people's old saying, that strength was measured in how much damage you could endure, and wondered if maybe humanity had known that truth long before the Krannix did. They just expressed it differently. The medical officer, a Silvari named Alaris, with the typical silver skin and ethereal grace of her species, took one look at Marcus and sighed in exasperation. "Let me guess, Instructor Vargith's durability demonstration?" she asked, already pulling up diagnostic equipment, and when they both nodded, she muttered something about testosterone poison species and their ridiculous displays that made Kaela hide a smile. As Alaris worked, scanning Marcus's injuries and applying targeted healing gel to the worst of the bruising, Kaela sat nearby, watching and thinking about the events of the day, about how her entire perspective had shifted in the span of a single training exercise. And she found herself studying Marcus in a new light, not as a fragile human who needed protection, but as someone who chose to be strong despite lacking the natural advantages her people took for granted. And that choice, she realized, was its own form of power. "You'll be fine. Some deep tissue bruising, minor muscle trauma, nothing that won't heal in a few days with proper rest. Which, knowing you stubborn types, means you'll be back in full training by tomorrow," Alaris said, directing her comments at Marcus, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "The human healing factor is actually quite impressive. Faster than your databases probably indicate. We're very good at recovering from damage." Evolutionary advantage from a rather violent history, Marcus explained. And Kaela's ears perked up at that, literally swiveling toward him with interest. Your planet had significant conflict? She asked, and Marcus's expression grew distant, thoughtful. Humanity spent most of its history fighting itself. Wars over territory, resources, ideology, beliefs. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times before we finally achieved global cooperation. And even that came about because we made contact with you, with the coalition. Suddenly having something larger than ourselves to be part of, he said, and there was old pain in his voice. Generational trauma that Kaela recognized because her people carried the same. Generations of warrior culture born from a hostile world where only the strong survived. My people are similar. We fought clan wars for centuries. Strength was the only currency that mattered. And it still is for many Krannix, which is why I came here, to the academy, to prove that we could be more than just warriors for hire, that we deserve to be full coalition members, not just muscle to throw at problems. Kaela found herself confessing, surprised at her own openness, but something about Marcus made her want to share, to be understood in a way she'd never experienced before. So we're both here, carrying the weight of our species' expectations, trying to prove something, Marcus said, meeting her eyes, and his hand found hers again. That simple touch that somehow communicated more than words. And Kaela nodded, her fingers intertwining with his, marveling at how his warmth seeped into her cooler skin. How different they were, and yet how similar in the ways that mattered. Alaris cleared her throat, breaking the moment, but there was a knowing smile on her silver features as she handed Marcus a small container of healing gel. Apply this twice daily, avoid heavy combat training for 48 hours. And maybe next time someone offers to let an instructor beat you with a metal rod, politely decline, she said, her tone dry but not unkind, and Marcus actually laughed, accepting the container with thanks. As they left medical, stepping back into the corridor where the academy's constant hum of activity surrounded them, Kaela felt Marcus's hand still in hers, and made no move to pull away, and if other cadets noticed, if they stared at the unusual pairing of Krannix and human walking together, she found she didn't care. Because somewhere between watching him and your impossible pain and feeling his hand in hers, her priorities had shifted dramatically. So what happens now? Kaela asked as they walked, no particular destination in mind, just moving through the academy's vast corridors, passing viewing windows that showed the stars beyond, the infinite possibility of space, and Marcus considered the question seriously. Now I probably need to write a very long explanation to my section leader about why I volunteered to be used as a practice dummy. And you probably need to explain why you advocated for stopping the test, which I imagine is out of character for a Krannix warrior, he said, with a slight smile. And Kaela felt her cheeks warm again, that strange flush that seemed to happen around him. I've never done that before, intervened, usually I believe in letting people face their own challenges, prove their own strength, but watching Vargas strike you, knowing each one hurt despite your control, I couldn't stand there anymore. And I don't fully understand why, she admitted, her ears lowering slightly in confusion, and Marcus stopped walking, turning to face her in the middle of the corridor, other cadets flowing around them like water around stones. Maybe for the same reason I volunteered in the first place. I watched you stand there taking those hits, saw the pride in your eyes, but also the isolation. The way you stood alone in that circle, like you always do. And I wanted to show you that you don't have to be alone. That someone else understood what it meant to endure, even if we do it differently, Marcus said, his voice low, intimate, despite the public setting. And Kaela felt something crack open in her chest. Some wall she'd built to protect herself from caring too much, from being vulnerable in a place where she thought only strength mattered. I've been alone since I arrived here. Alone by choice, because I thought connections were weakness, that caring about others would distract from my purpose. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe the strongest thing I could do is let someone in, Kaela said, the words coming from somewhere deep, honest, and raw. And Marcus's expression softened into something that made her heart beat faster. Then let me in, Kaela, and I'll let you in. We can figure this out together, two warriors from warrior species, trying to be more than what everyone expects, he said, and it wasn't a grand declaration, wasn't flowery or dramatic, just simple truth. And somehow that made it more powerful. And when Kaela nodded, accepting what he was offering, accepting what she was feeling, it felt like stepping off a cliff into freefall. Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. They ended up in one of the Academy's observation decks, a quiet space where cadets came to think, to process, to remember why they were here. And they sat together on the curved bench facing the massive viewport, the stars spreading before them in countless brilliant points. And Kaela rested her head on Marcus's shoulder carefully, aware of his injuries, and felt his arm come around her, and in that moment, with the universe stretched out before them, she felt something she hadn't felt since leaving Krannix Prime. She felt at peace. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, after a long silence, his voice quiet, almost hesitant, and Kaela made a small affirmative sound. "When you stepped forward, when you tried to stop the test, your ears were completely flat against your head. I've noticed they do that when you're stressed or worried. And I was wondering if that's a normal Krannix tell or if it's just you," he asked. And Kaela felt surprise ripple through her, because no one, absolutely no one had ever paid enough attention to her to notice that detail. "It's normal for my people. Our ears are highly sensitive, they pick up vibrations, sound wavelengths beyond most species' hearing. And they also express emotion involuntarily. Flat means fear or worry, forward means aggression or focus, relax means content or safe," she explained. And then added softly, "They've been relaxed since we sat down here. In case you were wondering." She felt rather than saw his smile, felt the way his chest moved with silent laughter, and his hand came up to gently touch the tip of one pointed ear, a touch so careful and reverent it made her shiver. "They're beautiful. Everything about you is beautiful, but not in a decorative way, in a fierce, powerful way, like a sword or a storm. Something dangerous and magnificent," Marcus said, and Kaela turned to look at him, finding his face very close to hers, his eyes reflecting starlight. And she saw herself reflected there, saw how he saw her, not as a weapon, or a warrior, or a representative of her species, but as Kaela, complex and contradictory and worth knowing. "You're the first person who's ever looked at me and seen past the armor, past the Krannix reputation, and I think that terrifies me more than any combat trial," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper, and Marcus's hand moved from her ear to cup her cheek, his palm warm against her luminescent skin. "Good. Fear means it matters, means this is real, and I'm terrified too, because I've never felt like this before, never connected with someone so quickly, so completely, and I don't know what happens next, but I want to find out," he said, and the distance between them shrank, slowly, giving either of them time to retreat, but neither did, and when their lips finally met, it was soft and careful and absolutely perfect. A first kiss under starlight that tasted like hope and possibility and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, Kaela's ears were doing something they'd never done before, actually quivering with emotion, and Marcus noticed his expression, somewhere between amused and awed. "Is that good or bad?" he asked, gesturing to her ears. And Kaela laughed, actually laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised her with its intensity. "It's new. I didn't know they could do that, which means you're causing unprecedented reactions. So take that as you will," she said, and Marcus grinned, that beautiful human expression of happiness, and pulled her closer, and they sat there for hours, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their homeworlds, their fears, their dreams, building connection word by word, moment by moment, and Kaela realized that this vulnerability, this openness, required more courage than any combat trial, because this was choosing to let someone matter, to give them the power to hurt you, and trusting that they wouldn't. The next morning, when training resumed, when they stood in formation with their respective sections, Kaela caught Marcus's eye across the yard, and he smiled, and she felt her ears perk up involuntarily, and she didn't care who noticed, because something fundamental had changed. She was no longer fighting to prove Krannix's superiority, she was fighting to protect something, to become worthy of what she and Marcus were building together, and that made all the difference. Instructor Vargath called them both forward during tactical assessment, and Kaela felt a moment of concern, wondering if their public connection had violated some protocol. But the Karathi's expression was unreadable as he looked between them. "Cadet Vordin, Cadet Chen, yesterday's durability demonstration had an unexpected outcome," you both proved that strength comes in many forms: durability, resilience, and perhaps most importantly, the courage to care about others, even when it costs you something," Vargas said, his voice carrying across the silent yard, and Kaela felt Marcus's hand brush against hers, a momentary touch of solidarity. "Therefore, you will be partnered for the next phase of training, cross-species combat teams, where you will learn to combine your different strengths into a unified tactical unit, and perhaps teach the rest of these cadets that the coalition's power comes not from individual species advantages, but from our ability to work together, to see each other as equals, despite our differences," Vargas continued, and Kaela felt something warm bloom in her chest. Pride and gratitude and excitement, because being partnered with Marcus, learning to fight alongside him, to trust him with her life as much as she was learning to trust him with her heart, that was an opportunity beyond price. They spent the following weeks training together, learning each other's combat styles, discovering how Kaela's raw power and Marcus's adaptive resilience complemented each other perfectly, how her ability to take massive damage allowed him to position for critical strikes, how his endurance meant he could outlast opponents while she dealt devastating blows. And more than the tactical advantages, they learned each other's rhythms, the way Marcus always went quiet before making a difficult decision, the way Kaela's ears would twitch when she was calculating odds, the tiny intimacies that built into deep understanding. And their combat scores climbed. But more importantly, their connection deepened, from teammates to partners, to something neither of them had words for, but both recognized as essential. The final examination came 16 weeks later, a brutal 48-hour field exercise where teams were dropped into hostile terrain and had to survive, evade hunter drones, complete tactical objectives, and extract without being captured. And Kaela stood beside Marcus in the drop ship, their armor and gear checked, their plans made, and she reached for his hand, squeezing once, a gesture that had become their wordless communication. "I'm here. I've got you. We'll face this together." The terrain was nightmare fuel, a volcanic region with toxic atmosphere, extreme temperatures, and terrain that shifted unpredictably, designed to test every species' weaknesses. And within the first 6 hours, 3 teams had already signaled emergency extraction, unable to handle the combined environmental stresses. But Kaela and Marcus moved through it like they'd been doing this for years, her strength clearing paths through collapsed lava tubes, his endurance keeping them moving when her energy reserves depleted, trading strengths back and forth, perfectly synchronized. They were pinned down by hunter drones on the second day, exhausted, running low on supplies, and Kaela's armor had taken damage that left her left arm barely functional, and Marcus had sustained an injury that left him limping. And for a moment, just a moment, Kaela wondered if they'd finally found the limit of what they could endure together. "We could signal extraction. We've already outlasted most teams. No one would think less of us," Marcus said, his voice strained with pain. And Kaela looked at him, this human who'd endured impossible things, who'd stood beside her through everything. And she thought about that first day, about the baton breaking on her armor, and Marcus asking if it was his turn, about the courage that question had required, and she smiled. "When have we ever settled for good enough? We finish this together, because that's what we do. We endure beyond reason," Kaela said, and Marcus's expression shifted into that look, the one that made her heart's race, pride and love and fierce determination mixed together. And he nodded, pushing to his feet, and she rose beside him, and they moved forward into the darkness, trusting each other absolutely, and that trust carried them through. They completed every objective, evaded every drone, reached the extraction point with hours to spare, and when they finally boarded the retrieval ship, when they collapsed together in exhausted relief, Kaela felt Marcus's hand find hers, and she held on tight, because this was what she'd come to the academy to find. Not proof of Krannix superiority, but proof that she could be part of something larger, something beautiful, a partnership that transcended species and expectations and became its own form of strength. The graduation ceremony 3 months later felt almost anticlimactory after everything they'd been through. But standing there in dress uniform, hearing their names called as top of their class, seeing the pride in Instructor Vargas' eyes, Kaela felt the significance of the moment. They'd done it, proved that humans and Krannix, fragile and stubborn and indestructible, could not just coexist, but thrive together. And when Marcus turned to her after the ceremony, when he pulled out a small box containing paired translation bands, the kind exchanged between partners who planned to serve together long term. She felt tears prick her eyes, something Krannix supposedly didn't do, but apparently she was full of surprises now. Kaela Vordin, you've made me stronger, braver, better than I ever thought I could be. And I want to keep doing this, facing the universe together, if you'll have me. Marcus said, and his voice was steady, but she could hear his heartbeat racing, could sense his nervousness and hope, and she took the offered band, sliding it onto her wrist, where it settled with a soft chime that matched the one on his wrist. A quantum link that would let them find each other anywhere in the galaxy. And she pulled him into a kiss that probably scandalized the more conservative species present. But she didn't care, because this was her choice, her partner, her future. Always. Marcus Chen, always, she said when they finally broke apart, her ears quivering with that unprecedented emotion again. And his hand came up to touch them gently, a gesture that had become their intimate greeting, and she leaned into the touch, marveling at how far they'd come from that day in the training yard, from the moment when a drill instructor broke his baton on her armor and a human asked if it was his turn, from the moment that changed everything. They received their assignments together, posted to a coalition exploration vessel, tasked with making contact with new species, with showing the galaxy what cooperation between different peoples could achieve. And Kaela thought it was perfect, because she and Marcus were living proof that strength came in many forms. That durability and resilience were two sides of the same coin, that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't firepower or armor, but the courage to stand beside someone and say, we'll face this together. As they boarded the ship that would be their home, as they stepped into their shared future, Kaela looked at Marcus and remembered something he'd said that first day in medical, about getting to know each other as simply Kaela and Marcus, not as representatives of their species, and she smiled, because they'd done that. Built something real and true and unshakable. And whatever challenges the universe threw at them next, she knew they'd endure. Because that's what they did. They endured beyond reason, together. And that made all the difference in the universe.